endless beaches, timeless ruins, exotic wildlife and famous tea, Sri Lanka has made a name for itself as a tourist destination, and even earned the top spot on Lonely Planet's travel destinations of 2019. Tourism is big business in Sri Lanka and has grown rapidly in the last 10 years, with the industry being one of the biggest contributors to the country's economy. But what they don't tell you is that behind Sri Lanka's beaches and tropical climate lies the government, with a long record of human rights violations lasting a 26-year-long civil war, which has left the minority Tamil population marginalised and seeking justice.
The Sri Lankan armed forces are accused of some of the most appalling atrocities of the 21st century. In the early months of 2009, tens and thousands of Tamil civilians were killed by government shelling. The then government of Sri Lanka, under the rule of Mahinda Rajapaksa, was really using tourism as a tool by which to sanitise the behaviour of the regime and to downplay allegations of serious human rights abuses, including disappearances and torture that were happening at that time. So despite the fact that the military in Sri Lanka are accused of some very serious human rights violations, they're now a really major player in the tourism industry in Sri Lanka. And it's not just hotels and resorts that they own, but it's restaurants, golf courses, diving centres. It's really quite breathtaking, the scale of their involvement in this sector.
With this, there's been an ever-growing military presence in the northeast of the island, with 14 of the 21 of the Army's divisions based there. And in some areas, there's ratios of 1 soldier for every 2 civilians. And despite the conflict ending over a decade ago, military spending has increased over the years, with the Ministry of Defence receiving the largest allocation in the 2019 budget. Sri Lanka's active military personnel stands at over 246,000, which would make it larger than that of France, Israel and the UK. The increased military presence has facilitated the use of torture, sexual violence and enforced disappearances. The army has been known to occupy thousands of acres of land, many of which is owned by the local Tamils.
People don't see the Sri Lankan army as their army, right? They see it as a foreign army. They don't see the Sri Lankan state as their state. It's a Sri Lankan state. It's Colombo, right?
In response, residents have taken things into their own hands. There are frequent roadside protests and demonstrations demanding answers on missing loved ones and the release of private land. Tourists may be unwittingly spending their money on military and government-owned facilities, where there's a real risk that this could end up benefiting human rights abusers and undermining any prospects of peace. Informed decisions and directing attention to more local, independent businesses can help even out competition.
When the military runs hotels or canteens and cafeterias, they're able to use the infrastructure that the state provides for them. So they're able to do things at a much lower cost. This is quite a deliberate tactic by the military too, to undercut local establishments.
Though we recognise that no tourist visit to Sri Lanka is without its negative consequences, there are a few things you can do to minimise this when planning your next trip. So here's what you can do. First, get informed. Make sure you research and read up on the Sri Lankan conflict to get an idea of the situation. Use the links on the websites in the description box below to cross-check where you stay and how you travel to see who it really benefits. Secondly, consider using local and ethical alternatives. Sri Lanka hosts many fantastic family-run hotels and local businesses, which offer experiences far more personal and intimate than any of the big resorts. And lastly, when you visit Sri Lanka, it is important to view your experience through a critical lens, as what is being presented to you is often a very different reality to the lived experiences of the people there, especially the Tamil community.